Hi, friends. Good evening. So, last week we explored the power of belief, and today we are exploring the power of the story. Friends, our corroboree was supercharged last week. Lina, as I'm sure they will be charged today as well, the way they engaged with us last week with so many comments, so many questions, fantastic interactions. We had so many questions and messages last Sunday during the episode, and today also we would love to have a repeat performance. So, Lina, tell me a little about today's concept, the power of the story.
So, Agnella Rajesh, the first time I actually realized the power of the story was when I was running schools, right? So, I was the first one I know of to officially announce and push inclusion in schools. This kind of just means that we are including children with needs outside what is known as the normal development spectrum and into the classrooms in the schools. So it's actually valuable to both the child being included as well as all the other children, as it is one of the most genuine ways of developing empathy. And we all know how important empathy is to overall EQ, emotional intelligence development, as well as leadership.
Fantastic, Lina. So I understand empathy with regards to EQ. Tell me how this is important to leadership, Lina.
So the ability to put yourself in somebody else's shoes is an essential skill that all leaders must have, because empathy is a competency that is key to being a leader. Because if you can't put yourself in somebody else's shoes, you can't lead them. And it's something that cannot be taught from a textbook or from a lecture. Children must develop it through their experiences. So, since we're on the topic of leadership, another thing, and we're talking about the power of the story, another thing that's not really taught in schools, but is really, really important in leadership roles is the power of storytelling. Turning business strategy into action. When you use facts or strategic maps, that does very little to rouse and motivate people. Only stories have the power to do this. So Jeff Bezos, he sums it up so beautifully. He says that you can have the best technology, you can have the best business model, the best strategy, but if the storytelling is not amazing, it won't matter. You can use storytelling in leadership roles positively or negatively. Look at the most influential leaders we have witnessed to date: Mahatma Gandhi, Abraham Lincoln, Adolf Hitler. They all roused powerful emotions that led to powerful actions and powerful outcomes. Each one of them, positive or negative, was a powerful storyteller.
Okay, so I'm clear about the importance of empathy and storytelling in the role of leadership. Lina, I also know why you keep saying EQ needs to be having as much focus, if not more, than IQ. So now please continue with your story about the power of the story.
So, but the inclusion story I was telling you, it
Yes.
used to be met with a lot of resistance from parents. I used to give them the facts about why inclusion was beneficial, but it's like Jeff Bezos says, I can say talk strategy, I can talk facts, but it was not heard by any parent. Till one day, a group of mothers, I was doing a workshop and they walked in and they had tears in their eyes and they're going, Lena, now we will always support you. We understand why inclusion is so necessary. We just watched Tare Zameen Par. This is when I first understood the power that has a story to shift somebody deeply at their inner core. Imagine something that I had to explain over and over again to try and win them on side for over 15 years. Amir Khan did it in one story. In fact, I would say Amir Khan, thanks to him, inclusion and dyslexia is seen, understood, across India because of that movie.
Wow, fantastic. So what I pick up from that is that facts and logic are less effective than a powerful story, and that's what Amir Khan did with his movie. So to explain to parents the importance of inclusion was definitely a challenge for you, but it is a walk in the park for a storyteller. What Amir Khan actually proved with his movie. So why are stories so powerful? I mean, I know that they are, but I don't understand why. In fact, when Netflix was asked who they are competing with, they said sleep, and I relate to this. They indeed compete with your sleep. So, Lina, I love what I do during the day more than watching Netflix. It's more important for me to do the activities I do during the day, and I want to be fresh for the work I do in the day. I promise myself when I wake up in the morning, sometimes with a lack of sleep, that I will sleep early tonight. But come night, and I find it very, very hard. I literally have to force myself to switch off the Netflix. Netflix really does compete with my sleep. I could almost say I'm addicted to Netflix.
Actually, Agnella Rajesh, you're not addicted to Netflix. What you're addicted to is stories. So Netflix is only one of the very powerful storytelling mediums. Stories
Mhm,
are an intrinsic part of our societies and our
mhm,
culture.
mhm.
It's not just Netflix, it's movies, books, music, religion, architecture, painting. All are mediums that include the power of storytelling.
So the influence of storytelling is present in all aspects of our life.
Yeah, absolutely. Defining our values, our desires, our dreams, as well as our prejudices and our hatred. It all begins with storytelling. You know,
Mhm,
imagine the partition of India. After that, so many stories were told, passed on from generation to generation,
mhm.
of pain, of despair. Depending on the stories you heard, you developed your thoughts and your beliefs, your prejudices and your hatred. You know, even history is a series of stories.
Absolutely. I totally agree to that, Leena. There are lovely audience today. Nailesh Shah, Gorkharam, Madan Mohan, Vinita Melwani, Madan Mohan Bhatt again, Nitin Munoth. There are some interesting comments as well. Vinita Melwani has mentioned, even though you are a leader, for example, in a school, it's important you make your teachers feel you are not above them, but one of them. Understand their challenges and stand by them. Thank you so much, Vinita. That is such a valuable comment from your side. Tanuja Rane, what a beautiful subject, power of story. So, Lina, going back to our conversation, there is a quote in history which says history is always written by winners. When two cultures, people, or countries have conflict, the loser loses and the winner writes the history books from the winner's perspective, books which glorify the winner. And as Napoleon once said, Lina, what is history but a fable agreed upon?
Just a bunch of stories. So it is Napoleon's quote and a powerful TED talk that I watched. It's the danger of a single story. That would
Mhm,
have you develop an exercise for children in our schools to overcome prejudices and hatred. So if you're an Indian student, rewrite the story of the partition for a classroom in Pakistan, right? So
mhm,
you have to actually see it from their perspective. If teachers in Pakistan did the same, that you're a student in a classroom in Pakistan, rewrite the history chapter for a student in an Indian classroom,
mhm,
can you imagine what we would have? We could have a
mhm.
world that sees that there are multiple versions, perspectives, which become either two stories or even multiple stories told and heard for the same set of events. The
Mhm.
danger of a single sided look at a story is an absolutely incomplete story.
Fantastic. So, if all of us were to explore stories from multiple perspectives,
Yeah.
this would build a sense of understanding and connection that could push past
Yeah.
religion and countries. It can give a completely different meaning altogether. We can use stories to bring humanity together, or even otherwise.
Absolutely, we could. You know, you um, if just imagine the power of doing something like this. Imagine the
Mhm.
power of stories, because it's how we think. They have so much power. We are constant storytellers. That's all we human beings are. This is how we make the meaning of life, and stories are how we create our identities. We define our social values.
Mhm.
Just what what fascinates me, and it's another exercise I gave our students to do. Watch CNN, which is anti-Trump, and watch
Mhm.
Fox, which is pro-Trump, and you'll hear two different stories about the same man and the same sets of events.
Absolutely. So we should then be mindful and conscious of the stories we tell. Stories are how we create our identities and define our social values, friends. I can now see that stories could also create our stereotypes and our biases.
They absolutely do. Narratives and stories that we tell children influence their perspective of the world. Think about fairy tales, right? In fairy
Mhm,
tales, most women, if they're good women, then they are kind, compassionate, and also helpless.
mhm,
And most princesses are always beautiful, slim, and fair, right?
mhm,
Most women that show signs of ambition or intelligence are mostly portrayed as villains, like Ursula in The Little Mermaid. So
Mhm.
a happy ending also is always when a noble prince on his white horse comes and saves or rescues a helpless princess. Marriage is always the happy after ending. And what we are constantly, when we tell these stories to our daughters, we're constantly ingraining to them that be submissive, be coy, wait for a man to come and save you and protect you and care for you.
In fact, as you say this, it comes to my mind that most stepmothers are portrayed as evil,
Yep.
not only in fairy tales for children, but also in TV serials for adults.
Yep, absolutely. So just think about Cinderella's stepmother. So when we're telling the kids stories, these are the images they're building of stepmothers. We can still use these stories for our children's development. We just have to do it differently. Ask them to think about the story from the stepmother's point of view. What could her fears be? What could her anxieties be? Then,
Hmm.
if you're reading them The Lion King, ask them to think about the story from Scar's point of view. How would he have felt being the second in line to the throne? And he absolutely is supposed to be, if you read the story, he's supposed to be more intelligent than the main protagonist. So we can still use these stories. We just have to keep on thinking, telling our kids to think about various ways in which these stories are not serving, their view of the world.
So this could help them understand prejudices, stereotypes, and help them empathize with different points of view and think creatively.
Yeah. So remember, with every story our children hear, read, or watch,
Mhm.
their minds make cognitive and emotional connections that shape the entire perspective of the world.
So why do we feel so emotionally connected to the character in the stories we hear, the stories we read, or the stories we watch?
So we've got something in our brains called mirror neurons. Yeah, it's what
Mhm.
makes you yawn. When you see somebody yawn, you yawn. It makes you cry when you see somebody in a story or something crying. We actually have mirror neurons that end up mirroring what somebody else is doing or feeling, and so it's what we call the empathy neurons. It's
Mhm.
what makes us, understand the characters we're watching and empathize with them.
So, Lena, there are too many comments and questions have started coming in. So, I would like to request the Corabri, our audience, to ask questions. We love your comments, but your questions will make us more engaged with you during this conversation. Lena, I would like to pick up a question from Nitin Munot, where he's asking, what's your take on storytelling in commercial life, Lena?
Oh, there's absolute storytelling in commercial life, right? So um, you never are buying a product or a service. You're buying an emotion. So you think about, Bacardi rum, for example. We're not allowed to see ads anymore, but it was such a powerful ad. It's not selling the rum; it's selling freedom. It's selling friendship. It's selling companionship. It's selling everything but the rum. It's selling you an emotion that if you do this, this is how you will feel.
Mhm. Absolutely. So Divya has a question. Yes, I always wanted Red Butler from Gone with the Wind because my French teacher used to narrate it during every free period. So which stories we as adults read? Autobiographies of successful people. She's asking a question on that. Which
So,
stories we as adults should read?
so I think anybody you admire, yeah. So everyone values and admires different people. So
Yes.
depending on your goals, your values, your sets of beliefs, right? Some people think Steve Jobs was a great leader. Some people think he wasn't a great leader. So
Mhm.
basically, what you need to do is first. I need to switch off my WhatsApp. Sorry, it's so basically what you need to do is the person you admire, the person you want to be like, read their story, because that's the story that will give you an understanding of what they went through and what they did to overcome, and those are the stories that will ingrain the right sets of things you should do, habits, values, beliefs in your mind.
Fantastic. Amara Habib has a question. Is storytelling an innate skill or can we learn it?
We can absolutely learn it. So that's why we've got a special guest next week coming in, and we'll talk about it more then. But yes, we can absolutely learn it. And storytelling is something that we don't do enough of in schools, but we should be doing it in all schools, and we will do it when we actually create our own school. Storytelling is an absolute need of the future.
Amol Patil has a question. Can you throw some lights on the narrative therapy?
On the narrative therapy, well, I'm not sure about the narrative therapy, so I'll have to read about it and come back. But I'm guessing by narrative therapy, it's just that you tell yourself a different story than the one you're telling yourself right now, is how I would logically think about it.
Fantastic. So now I understand why I became so engrossed in a story or a character situation that I cannot pull away from the story on the screen or the story in the book, Lina.
So as our mirror neurons become activated, we connect with the characters in the story, right? So also our brain releases oxytocin. Oxytocin is known as the bonding or love hormone. It's the same hormone we release when we physically hug in the real world, or even when we shake hands.
So Lena, not much of physical hugging going on now, thanks to the current pandemic or even handshakes. But I read about the reason why we shake hands in a business interaction. That when we shake hands, it releases the bonding hormone oxytocin. That shaking hands does the important work of preparing your brain to form or strengthen your connection with someone.
Absolutely. So it's when our mirror neurons, are activated, we release the oxytocin. It makes us feel close to the characters or to the person, even though we may not have any physical or personal contact with the actor on the screen, right? But it makes us unconsciously then mirror their actions and their emotions.
So is this why when we connect with the character fighting for his life on the movie screen, we feel the fear and the anxiety as if we were the ones being attacked?
Absolutely, because their feelings are reflected in the mirror of your own neural wiring, right? So the characters, it's basically the characters' actions and emotions quite literally are mapped over your own brain's sensory representation. So whatever you perceive their emotion to be on the screen is being picked up by your mirror neurons, and then you're experiencing the same emotion. Experiencing a story actually alters our neurochemical processes, and therefore stories are such a powerful force in shaping human behavior.
In fact, so powerful that historically all conflicts began on stories being told to aggravate situations and leading to human casualties. So when we see someone chase, cry, or feel pain on the screen, our mirror neurons map the actions the screen characters perform. Isn't that right, Lena?
Not only do our mirror neurons map the actions we see that other people perform onto the motor and sensory parts of our brain, but it also maps the intentions and emotions accompanying the actions. So you always, when you're watching someone, you think you're saying, you're almost preempting why they're doing what they're doing. So you're actually mapping their intentions as well. So we subconsciously map the fictional characters' actions, emotions, sensations onto our brains. So we have an emotional experience even though it is not actually happening to us. So there are studies now that are showing that, autistic children actually have mirror neuron defects. And that's what makes it difficult for them to understand the emotions of other people.
Lovely. That's so awesome, Lena. There are so many questions just pouring in. I feel I love this engagement when the audience is participating with us in this complete conversation. There is Meghna Parekh, who's asking, how do we teach children and adults to differentiate between real and fake news, which are also narrated as stories?
Oh, so that is a moonshot conversation all on its own. But there are certain things, just like I said to you earlier, that if you take a set of events and then you actually show CNN and Fox News, kids will start understanding that people are only telling stories about the same sets of events.
So Smita Mata has a question. How do we teach history in schools through unbiased stories when using a text that is based on the board curriculum? Interesting question.
So exactly like I did it. So if I'm saying, that I'm rewriting this story from another perspective, right? How would it turn out? So you can, I would ask kids to look at, we none of us enjoy that the British ruled India. But I would ask kids to think about, name 3 positive things that came out of the fact that the British ruled India. I mean, we speak English because the British ruled India, for one, and then that helps us in the trade world. And so kids have to come out with other reasons or the other options or the perspectives, other alternatives. They have to start putting themselves in other people's shoes.
Fantastic. Shubhangi Tirudkar has an interesting comment. It is Indian tradition. We always get valuable insights about life and it gets passed on from generations. Thank you, Shubhangi. Divya has a question. Do storytellers and listeners need to develop certain skills for successful storytelling and listening?
Yeah, so storytellers, if you have voice modulation, all the normal kind of stuff that you talk about, but if you, as you're telling the story, can actually feel the story, you will tell a beautiful story. And story listeners today, one of the key reasons we're going to tell kids stories is because the world is getting so distracted, right, with so much of data constantly bombarding our senses. So one of the really great things is that when we tell children stories, we're actually developing their power of attention.
Fantastic. So I know that from time immemorial, Lena, that stories have been a part of human history and narrated in various forms, parables, fairy tales, various books about different faiths, all in a way or another tell us stories only. So stories are powerful and they take hold of us so intensely, Lena.
Yeah, story. Even religious stories have been told because they trigger reactions in our brain that excite our emotional states. So, and emotions are not any laughing matter because human beings are innately emotional creatures with a supercharged capacity to feel. So, as I said earlier, when a child or an adult, when we listen to the stories, the trust hormone oxytocin is released. So, it's what indicates to us that we're safe, that we're secure. But here's another scientific reason, Agnil Rajesh, that explains why stories are so powerful. And it kind of builds on the first. Storytelling is an effective influencing technique. Like and it was used negatively by someone like Hitler and positively by somebody like Gandhi. This is because it's emotion, not logic, that drives our decision-making process. And today, as somebody mentioned, the advertising and media world uses this to sell. They don't sell you a product, they sell you an emotion.
Fantastic. So that is the power of a story. I have read that storytelling is arguably the most powerful tool in selling, in any selling toolbox, in fact. Storytelling is an ancient art, but today, even the business and the marketing world is starting to understand its potential to influence and sell. And we are all so used to it. All the time we are reading or hearing some story or the other. Giving your product or brand a story to go along with, it humanizes your brand, and it increases the chances that people will relate to it, connect with it, and probably transact with you. In fact, studies show that marketing campaigns based on logic are way less effective than emotionally driven ones that tell a story.
Absolutely, because we're human beings and we're programmed for stories. It's part of who we are. We evolved to understand our place in the world before we had written language. As you said, we passed on lessons about where we find food, what threats were coming for us, how to build relationships. Everything we learned from generation to generation was through a story. So we are biologically also wired to help each other, and that's why we tell stories to each other. The survival of our species depends on our ability to cooperate, avoid danger, and take advantage of opportunities. Sharing wisdom through stories is one of the ways very powerfully that we can do this. And the bonds of our humanity grow stronger because we share a similar story.
So as human beings, we are programmed to respond to stories as they helped us to survive. I now know that stories light up our brains. Wow. I understood that I like stories. And that is so interesting, Lena. In fact, I love stories, but I'm happy to know and share that there is brain science attached to storytelling.
Absolute brain science. So essentially, our brains run on electrical pulses. And when we hear stories, they can actually map that our brains light up. So neuroscientists also keep saying that, neurons that fire together wire together. So when we're hearing a story and our brain is lighting up, you have all of these neurons that are firing and then wiring, firing and then wiring. And that triggers us to remember the information that we're getting.
Fantastic. So if stories trigger us to remember more of the information we are getting, should we not use it more often in schools to teach and also to teach the adults, Lina?
Absolutely. I used to use it a lot in schools because Neuroscience research into memory, what it highlights and tells us is that the power of learning through stories is more powerful than anything else, and it can help kids build understanding, wire information in their long-term memory. In even the most challenging or boring of school subjects, like algebra or history, if it's any of this is presented in a familiar story format, memory structures facilitate retention of that information. So stories should be used as a powerful teaching tool. They can ignite ideas. They can stir up feelings of awe, inspiration, wonder. They hold such great power, more than we could ever imagine. And like I said before, neuroscience researchers found that if we tell stories, it affects our physical and mental makeup on many different levels. When you're watching a stressful scene, your actual blood pressure will be affected. So from connecting both sides of the brain to triggering the release of specific neurotransmitters, stories cause real mental and physical change to our thoughts, feelings, and often our actions.
So, Lina, if stories can cause real change to our thoughts, feelings, and action, then stories can be a powerful tool to use for self-mastery also.
There's a saying, Agnella Rajesh, that stories we tell literally make up our world. If you want to change the world, you have to change if you want to change your world, yourself, you have to change your story. So that goes for the external world we create, or the internal world we create, the self-mastery world. So whatever happens to us will happen, right? But what is important is the story we tell ourselves about what happens. And I've said this before in the optimistic mindset. We use our stories to explain events, examine our values, and explore notions of meaning and purpose. In this sense, stories are the best ground for reflection. So even in the reflective journals, they're very often mini stories that are there. And our personal stories are never complete. They're just a narrative that keeps on evolving as we try to see the world from multiple points of view. So we do it all day long. We tell ourselves stories about what's happening in our lives, about other people, about ourselves. Everybody on our corroboree watching is telling themselves a story about us.
Fantastic. But since our destiny follows our stories, it is imperative and important that we do everything in our power to get stories right. For most of us, that might mean some serious editing, Lina.
Absolutely. So to edit a dysfunctional story, a story that's not working for you, you must first identify it. To do that, you must first answer the question, what important areas what are the important areas of my life? What are my goals? Can I meet these with the story that I've got? So your life is the most important story that you will ever tell. And you're telling it right now. We're all telling ourselves stories about ourselves. And that's whether we are consciously aware of it or not. So from very early on, we're spinning and telling stories about our life, publicly and privately, about our stories. And our stories have a theme, they have a tone, and they have a real background to it, whether you know it or not.
So in fact, even when we gossip, we are telling stories to someone about something or someone else. Lina, even generally reading the stories about success and challenges of others could teach us so much. Their challenges, their solutions, their learnings, their journey.
So like Divya asked before, amazing. And even non-fiction books, even if they're about a person, while they may be written to inform you, about business or self-development, they all still use the power of the story to explain concepts within them. So it's the story behind the concept that you will remember rather than the concept alone. So facts and data, as I said, facts and data activate the left side of your brain. The right side of the brain sees the big picture. And this is when you use the left and the right side together for anything, it makes an increase in neural activity. And that increase in neural activity is what embeds the information even deeper. So anything that integrates the left side and the right side of your brain like a story makes it easier for you to integrate new information into your experience.
Fantastic. So true, Lina. Imagine just telling people that pay attention to what is going on around you, or be wary of getting into a comfort zone, versus the story of the boiling frog. Friends, let me share the story of the boiling frog, which I'm sure most of us know about it. But I will still love to say this, that a frog was placed in a pot of cool water on the stove. Not sensing danger, the frog stayed. We all know this We must have heard this multiple times. But what happens then is very interesting. Then the burner on low gas gets gradually turned up. As the water warms, the frog relaxes. The warmth feels good. As the water gets hotter, it acts like a steam. It acts like a steam bath, draining away energy and deepening the frog's relaxation. In fact, the frog becomes sleepy and has less and less energy while water is getting hotter and hotter. By the time the frog realizes its danger, the water is beginning to boil and it is too late to take action. There is neither time nor energy left to do anything for the frog. The frog perishes in the boiling water. I can see how using both sides of our brain could increase neural activity and help us to remember the story and the lesson along with it.
So it's the same reason, Agnella Rajesh, why we can remember the songs that we hear. We hear a song a few times, we remember it. So if I was just to give you that song, on a piece of paper without the music, you couldn't memorize it. But it's what happens when you're listening to a song. The left side of your brain processes the words, and the right side processes the music. So as I said, when you use both sides, you have better retention. So also, songs are a form of storytelling, right? It heightens your emotions, and that heightens your ability to memorize experiences, helps improve the information processing, including first the song. So stories and songs make it easier for us to store data, and we can retrieve it later, just like you retrieve the story of the frog. So emotions are the signal to the brain that whatever we experience is important, because we're emotional creatures. So as a result, the brain will always pay more attention to emotional states rather than factual states, right? So it's the reason why we always remember our first kiss. It was an emotional moment. Or, where we were when Princess Diana died. Or if you're old enough like me, where we were when Indira Gandhi died. Because all of these things carried an emotional charge. So the more emotional it is, the more we relate to a narrative, and the more likely we'll be able to remember the information presented. That goes for stories as well.
Friends, storytelling captivates interest and connects to memory, and is something that is not only something we do at the bedtime. Reading stories to toddlers and children is really important then.
Absolutely. Storytelling is a must for children. The experiences we have as young children, as we're listening to stories, provides the brain's memory storage a foundation for learning and remembering. It also builds positive emotional connections between the storyteller and the child. And next week, we'll learn more about that. So listening to stories during childhood gives us a framework of memorable, pleasurable experiences that the brain remembers and continues to seek throughout its life.
In the beginning, all stories must have been oral stories. There was no print, and obviously, definitely no video. So oral stories must have been passed down from generation to generation, just like Shubhangi Tirodkar just said some time back.
Yep. So obviously, storytelling has been in existence since historical records began. The ancient Greek author Homer completed the Odyssey thousands of years ago, and it was passed from generation to generation, and then was used by the Greeks to teach cultural values and preserve a common identity. It's the stories we tell each other as a country that create the identity of who we are, right? So another example is what I find fascinating is the Dreamtime storytelling, that the indigenous Aborigines tell, and it's the way that they teach their children about the Dreamtime, and for them that's a time in mythology where the spirits created the land, the people, the plants, and the animals.
We have explored before when we have spoken about the power of beliefs and visualization. To the human brain, imagined experiences are processed the same way as real experiences.
Absolutely. And through stories, we stimulate the power of imagination. We tap into creativity, self-discovery, and the power of change. There's a saying, change your story, change your life. In fact, it's believed by most historians and psychologists that storytelling is one of the most important things that defines and binds our humanity. Human beings are possibly the only animal that create and tell stories.
Would stories be more effective than direct guidance with our children, Reena?
Absolutely. The most powerful thing you can do for your kids is to tell them, share stories from your own life in order to shape theirs. Stories of when you failed, how you felt, how you overcame. So our personal stories have immense power to guide, comfort, and shape our children in a much more meaningful way than a list of do's and don'ts, and the values as well. You shape them by the stories you tell. So use stories with your children to inspire them and to help build their life story. We use stories like the little engine who said he could to teach perseverance, or Pollyanna to teach a spirit of optimism.
I can also mention movies like Pay It Forward that teaches the importance of kindness, generosity, warmth, and gratitude. Another movie is In Pursuit of Happiness, which is a movie that talks about determination, self-belief, persistence, and going after our dreams. Lina, once again, we have run out of time. What's the next topic for next Sunday?
So you spoke about the fact that we should be conscious of the stories we tell. So
Yes.
next week, we have a very special guest again, an author of Conscious Stories for Children.
Wow, fantastic. So next week we are going to have a special guest, and along with our corroboree, we are going to enjoy the interaction and the level of the same quality of engagement that we had today. There are plenty of comments and questions. I'm sure Lina will be getting back to them later on. Thank you, Smita Matai, for participation, Amol Patil, Meghna Parekh, Edna Fernandez, Joshna Balaji, Vinita Melwani, Baburaj Vidu, again Edna, Sonali Jaidare, who else? Dharna Kapoor Vich, Madan Mohan Bhatt, Sandeep Pote, Tanuja Rane. Thank you, everybody, and all the other people who have commented and asked questions. We will see you again next Sunday at 5 p.m. again, the Indian Standard Time, and we will maintain the same level of engagement. We look forward to your comments and your questions, and all the comments and questions which you have posted today will be replied back by Lina. I also remind you again to download the journals and make it a part of your life. Trust me, you and your family will absolutely not only love it, not only will be engaged with it, but it will change the way you think. Thank you so much.
See you next Sunday.